Live from St. Louis, it's compliance training. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake Fechter.
Good evening, Buckingham community, and welcome to Compliance Night Live. I am your host, Jake Fechter, and I am absolutely delighted to be here with you. It has been almost 4 years since our last in-person training. We last hosted a session in the Development Center in December of 2019, and man, has the world really changed since that time. We were able to host 2 different in-person trainings this year in the St. Louis office in July, and those listening to the training now will still get to experience some of the fun we had with our live show. We hope you enjoy, laugh, and learn something over the next hour. But the way we consume information has also forever changed. Attention spans are shorter than ever, and if you can't convey a point in a short amount of time, you risk losing your audience. This is why we've tweaked our annual training a bit to be both fun with our Saturday Night Live theme, but also be as brief as possible by dividing things into skits. We will have short 7 to 10 minute modules, followed by a brief 1-question quiz with some fun commercials sprinkled in between. Associates can start and stop these videos at any time, but the intent is that we are in and out in less than an hour. Sound good? Awesome. Well, we have a great show for you guys tonight. Risk Target 6 is playing, and to kick us off with our first skit, here is Sal Papa to discuss the history and an overview of compliance. Enjoy the show.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about a little bit of the history of compliance, and then some core foundational items that are essential to cover in any ethics and compliance training. So first is hard to believe, but we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of the compliance programs rule. It was a rule that sort of had a tectonic shift in sort of how firms had to approach compliance. It was adopted after a number of kind of industry scandals and industry problems, in particular, where firms didn't have appropriate compliance policy and procedures to prevent sort of violations of the securities laws, including the Advisors Act. So when you think about why we have all these policies and procedures, why we do an annual review, why we have a chief compliance officer, the foundation of that is driven from this compliance programs rule. So transitioning into kind of the most important slide, arguably, for the entire presentation, it's fiduciary duty. The Advisors Act lays out 2 basic fiduciary duties for all investment advisors, and what the duties that they owe to their clients: the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. And an advisor must always serve the best interest of its clients and cannot put its own interest ahead of the interest of its clients. And when you look at these sort of 2 core obligations, I think of about it in 3 sort of tranches. 1, put clients' interests first. 2, act with good faith and don't mislead. And then 3, full and fair disclosure. And ultimately, the intent, I think, behind the advisor's fiduciary duty is to help eliminate or mitigate all conflicts of interest. And that's why what we do every day, all day, is work on sort of identifying conflicts of interest, eliminating those conflicts of interest, or mitigating those conflicts of interest for those that we cannot eliminate. And this is sometimes described as the problem of wearing 2 hats. And of course, self-interest is always one element of a conflict. And when we go through our own mental checklist of identifying conflicts, we think about, is there a conflict between the firm and the client? Is there a conflict between a client versus a client? Is there a conflict between an associate and a client? Or is there a conflict between the associate and the firm? And we think about relationships. We think about affiliations. We think about outside business activities. We think about transactions. And lastly, we think about compensation or some other financial interest. Doesn't have to be direct compensation or a direct financial interest. It can also be indirect. And so when you think about all of these different reporting requirements that we have under the Code of Ethics, well, they're all designed ultimately to identify and address the conflict of interest. Think of reporting of outside business activities. Think of the reporting of personal securities transactions, think of the reporting of personal political contributions. All of those things ultimately are designed to address the conflict of interest. Ultimately, right, when we think about these standards of conduct and we think about fiduciary duty and we think about how we address conflicts of interest, well, the core foundation of all of that, of course, is ethics. And one of my favorite quotes is, "It takes many good deeds to build a good reputation and only one bad one to lose it." And that's why we always talk about our compliance program as an ethics and compliance program, and focus on the core of what is the foundation of the program, which is ethics. And ultimately, ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, which means moral character. And ethics means knowing the difference between right and wrong and doing the right thing. And in doing a little bit of research for sort of continued ethics training and incorporating ethics into our ethics and compliance program, came across an article that talked about the underlying principles that drive desired ethical behavior. And this particular article talked about sort of generally 11 core business ethics principles. And those 11 core ethics business principles were listed as, and each one then had a definition after it: leadership, accountability, integrity, respect for others, honesty, respect for laws, responsibility, transparency, compassion, fairness, and loyalty. And I would highlight three of them, and I'm just going to read from this article itself that sort of particularly stuck out to me that I thought were important to share. So first, accountability. Holding yourself and others responsible for their actions. Commitment to following ethical practices and ensuring others follow ethics guidelines. Secondly, integrity. Incorporates other principles: honesty, trustworthiness, and reliability. Someone with integrity consistently does the right thing and strives to hold themselves to a higher standard. And then lastly, the third one that really stuck out to me: honesty. Truth in all matters is key to fostering an ethical climate. Partial truths, omissions, and under or overstating don't help a business improve its performance. Bad news should be communicated and received in the same manner as good news so that solutions can be developed. So those three really stuck out to me. And ultimately, every single audience member plays a key role in our ethical foundation, and thinking through how you might go about making a decision and thinking through of those key ethical principles. And ultimately, I always like to phrase it as, what is the decision that you might make when you think no one else is looking?